Good evening. Welcome to Bedtime Stories. Magnolia Hill wasn't just a place, it was a living, breathing, foul breathed monster that sucked the essence out of anyone who stepped foot on its soil. The plantation itself was a boil on the face of the earth and a blot on humanity. A place other planters threatened to sell their slaves off to when they wanted to scare the sweet bejesus out of them. Gone was the humble cabin Etienne and Wolf built so many years ago. The house proper now sat high atop a grassy knoll, surrounded by densely planted magnolia trees, and thus its name became Magnolia Hill. It was a sprawling thing of beauty, built on the west bank of the Mississippi River between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and about a quarter mile south of the fiery gates of hell. The slaves at Magnolia Hill were expendable commodities. They were used and tossed away like a pair of beat up old shoes that had lost their shine. The slaves that weren't killed outright were either worked into an early grave or they had their spirit beaten out of them to the point they were the walking dead. The plantation was a self contained southern fiefdom. Old man Cleedemont was the bloodthirsty mad king. Claude, his son, was the vicious, despotic prince. And Cleedemont's two muckraking grandchildren, Julianne and Henri, fashioned themselves as the dandified duke and the malicious marquis, respectively. Every acre was shrouded in a dark cloud of hate and despair. Its rich soil was fertilized in blood and watered with the tears of countless men, women, and children whose mournful spirits wailed for retribution. A night owl's portentous hoot and the piteous moans of a slave left to die in the hot box chased the weary slave woman from the big house. The light of a full moon presented her face in sharp relief as she ran. She had once been very beautiful, but now her face was marred by two long disfiguring scars resembling permanent tears, one on each cheek. She hurried on bare feet to the plantation kitchen, which was housed in a separate building upwind of the main house. This was where the plantation cook, Mother Ethel, was watching her 3-day-old baby and where she slept on a thin straw pallet on the kitchen floor. The rag she had carefully packed herself with earlier that day was soaked clear through with blood and clots. Warm blood trickled down her leg with every step. She could smell the stink of it. She could also smell the cloying shroud of Mistress Felicity's blood. It attached itself to her clothing like a clinging vine and followed her like a storm cloud chasing the moon. The slave woman's name was Aboyani, but her mama and everyone else who knew her called her Sorrow, because that was all she was ever gonna know. Sorrow was not yet healed from birthing her own baby but a few short days ago. Yet she'd been up all day and into the night working like a pack mule to bring the mistress's child into the world. It had been an extremely long and difficult labor which ended badly for both mother and child, just as she prayed it would. Try as she might, Sorrow couldn't muster a shred of pity for the woman or her dead child. The corpse whose body was growing cold in the big house right now belonged to the same woman who had watched Sorrow's man get whipped to death and fed to the pigs. She was the same woman who sat on the front porch sipping a mint julep while Sorrow lay in the dirt screaming in anguish. Felicity Etienne's death was grounds for celebration. It represented just one less white person to deal with. And the death of her child represented one less child that would grow up to be a white person she'd have to deal with. Sorrow silently prayed the devil was sticking a pitchfork up both their asses. While the white folks were clicking glasses and celebrating the pending birth of another somebody to make Sorrow's life miserable, Sorrow had busied herself rushing to the kitchen to melt down the tallow to make a candle. She used the ash from the cooking fire to stain it black. Then she molded that candle into the shape of a pregnant Mistress Felicity and Master Claude. She heated the blade of the knife in the fire, and when it was white hot, she sliced the candle down the middle, symbolically severing Felicity's connection with her husband and with her child. Then Sorrow called upon the Orisha gods and goddesses of war to bring down pain and destruction on the Etiennes. She stabbed the still hot blade of the knife into the belly of the candle representing Felicity. And now, praise be to the goddess, Felicity Etienne and her baby were both dead. A blast of heat from the kitchen cooking fires confirmed Sorrow's belief that she was indeed in hell on earth. When she reached for her baby, the old cook Ethel's rheumy eyes surveyed her sorry condition as a thick drop of blood plopped on the dirt floor. Go on and clean yourself up, gal. Won't hurt me none to look after this little baby a bit longer. Now go on. Ethel shooed Sorrow along while massaging the baby's little back, making cooing sounds. Sorrow hastened to do Ethel's bidding. Somehow she managed to express her thanks through lips that had long ago forgotten how to smile. Once she was cleaned up, Sorrow took the baby from Ethel. She immediately put the baby to the tit. The baby suckled hungrily. Ethel asked if the mistress had that baby yet, while stirring the stew that would be served for the evening dinner. Sorrow bit into one of Ethel's hot, buttery biscuits before answering. The baby dead, she said without emotion. And soon, if it ain't happened already, Mistress Felicity gonna be dead too. Ethel said, Lord have mercy, before sitting her fulsome arthritic figure down heavily on a nearby stool. Sorrow held her newborn on one hip while she steeped some herbs to make a tea she would drink to heal her insides from the recent birth. Master Claude and his daddy must have ice water flowing through their veins, she said. Master Claude stood at the foot of the birthing bed like he was betting on a racehorse. When the baby came out dead, Master Claude screamed at me to get out the birthing chamber, even though the mistress was bleeding like a pig stuck with a pitchfork. He wouldn't even let me pack her to stop the bleeding. She bled out before I turned my back to open the door. Sorrow handed Ethel a cup of the tea. It wouldn't do the old woman any harm. Ethel said, Thank you, baby. She blew on the tea to cool it off before taking a sip of the steaming brew. You know how white folks is, child, Ethel said with the wisdom that comes from a lifetime in captivity. Now that Master Claude got himself an heir and a spare and Mistress Felicity's money, he don't have no more use for her. I expect he'll just go on out and get himself another victim. Sorrow nodded her head in agreement. Felicity Valcor Amy Etienne came from money. She was the only child of Armand Valcor Amy, who was owner of St. Joseph Plantation in St. James Parish. She brought a huge dowry into the marriage. Sorrel jumped up when she heard sounds of horses' hooves. She went to peer out the window. Ethel, you ain't gonna believe this. Master Cleedemont and his nasty-ass son Claude just saddled up. I bet they on their way to town to carouse at that black whorehouse. Ethel's expression was pinched. I guess they're gonna leave the mistress and that dead baby till morning without a second thought. It's a shame before God, Ethel said, and then her huge breasts shook with merriment. If we leave it up to them, they'll do us a big favor and kill off every white woman this side of St. John the Baptist Parish. Then we'll only have to deal with the white men folk. The women laughed companionably. Sorrow stared out the window long after the dust settled from the Etienne's horses' hooves. Now both of them been through two wives, she said. And then in a more somber tone of voice, Sorrow said, I only wish the angel of death had plucked the two of them along with the mistress. Sorrow never met a white person she didn't hate. and she never hated one more than she hated Clédemont Etienne. It didn't much matter that he was her daddy. I hope that you enjoyed listening to the excerpt from The Bliss of the Grave as much as I enjoyed reading it. May the Creator find favor with your spirits and you find joy in your lives. Ashe O.